Tensions across the Middle East continue to escalate. The conflict is expanding on multiple fronts. Despite the French mediation efforts, Israeli airstrikes and a ground operation in southern Lebanon continues, with rising casualties and a growing fear of a wider war. At the same time, a major escalation with Iran is unfolding, following the assassination of senior figures including the Basij commander Gholam Reza Soleimani and the Supreme National Security Council Secretary Ali Larijani in Israeli strikes. Meanwhile, the US President Donald Trump is facing a widening rift with European allies and NATO members after calling for a coalition to secure the Strait of Hormuz, an effort that key European states have refused to join. The strategic waterway remains the center of global energy concerns. Regionally, Egypt has strongly condemned attacks targeting Gulf states, warning of further destabilization and calling for restraint. Is the region heading towards a broader confrontation? Can diplomacy contain the escalation in Lebanon and the Gulf? And what does the growing divide between Washington and its allies signal for this crisis? We're going to attempt to answer all these questions here on this special coverage. Israel claims a major breakthrough, reporting the killing of Iran's security chief Ali Larijani. Airstrikes also eliminating the besieged leader Gholam Reza Soleimani, striking the heart of Tehran's command. While Iran confirmed Soleimani's death, the gigantic revenge for Larijani remains a mystery despite Israeli reports. This campaign targets the regime's top officials in an attempt to paralyze their military strategy. Netanyahu vowed further surprises as oil prices continue to surge during this crisis. This escalation significantly weakens Iran's ability to manage its internal and external fronts. President Trump faces stiff resistance while building a naval alliance for the Strait of Hormuz. Many partners refuse to join, leaving Washington isolated in this maritime crisis. While Britain offers support, Europe and Japan remain skeptical. They fear deeper conflict despite soaring energy costs. This defiance stalls American efforts to unblock vital global oil routes. Trump cautions that NATO's future is at stake. Without help, the blockade remains a major hurdle to victory.
We're doing very well, I will say. We're knocking them for a loop. They can't have a nuclear weapon, and they now understand that very strongly. But
to talk to us more about the continuing of the escalations in the region, we're joined from Cairo by Mr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations specialist, and from New York by Ahmed Maharim, a writer and political researcher. Thank you both for joining our special coverage. Mr. Osman, let's start off with you here. Now, following the Israeli strikes that killed senior figures in Iran, including Larijani, how does this reshape the dynamics or the confrontation between the Israelis and the Iranians?
Good morning, Graham. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be with you. Of course, the assassination of Larijani is an incident or an event of very significant dimensions, actually, because Larijani is arguably the most central figure within the Iranian regime over the past 20 years, a very close confidant of the former supreme leader Ali Khamenei, one of the main political masterminds behind the foreign policy of the Iranian regime. He's a man with a security background, being a member of the IRGC, and He even reached the rank of brigadier general and was the deputy commander of the IRGC back in the day. Then he evolved into his own political career afterwards, becoming a speaker of the Iranian parliament for 3 consecutive terms. And also his last position was the Secretary General of the Supreme Security Council of Iran, a position that gives him huge responsibilities and authorities and powers when it comes to the strategic planning of the country and the country's foreign policy and defense policy as well. Larijani was a central figure in coordinating efforts and policies between the different branches of the regime, whether being the bureaucratic political class or the religious clergy or the security element in the regime, which is the strongest, mainly the IRGC and the other security agencies and the paramilitary structures like the Basij, for example. And after the death of Khamenei, it has been reported, and I do believe these reports, that Ali Larijani was basically running the show, Rehab. He was running the country in essence.
So do you think that this assassination possibly maybe somehow put an imbalance when it comes to how the Iranians are going to deal with things going forward, because they've lost someone, as you said, who's basically running the show?
Certainly it is. I do believe some might assume or argue that I'm exaggerating, but I don't believe I am. The death of Ali Larijani is way more significant than the death of Ayatollah Khamenei himself, because Ayatollah Khamenei, even though he was the supreme leader and the supreme authority, he was an old man, 87 years old, and the day-to-day affairs of governing were delegated to certain members of the regime, and most important among them was Ali Larijani, who basically was this common area or coordinating person between the security element or the security branch of the regime and the other branches, basically. And he, even though he is from the conservative camp inside the Iranian elite and the Iranian regime, yet, and even though he had his own radical tendencies, yet he also did retain a certain diplomatic outlook. He was a pragmatist, and actually he was one of the main proponents behind the 2015 nuclear agreement at the same time. So the absence of Larijani, Reham, means that now the Iranian regime is fully under the control of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, who put Mujtaba Khamenei in power. Nobody even knows if Mujtaba is capable of running anything. Reports say that he is injured, he hasn't appeared, he hasn't spoken. So basically a bunch of generals from the IRGC right now who have very radical tendencies are the one running the show, which means this gives us very gloomy prospects about the future of this conflict and how Iran will interact with any diplomatic overtures.
Okay, we're going to get back to the consequences of this assassination, but let's get Mr. Mohammed's take here. Now, let's take a look at Lebanon. With the Israeli airstrikes continuing to intensify and expand into ground operations in southern Lebanon, how do you assess the current military objectives when it comes to Israel, and what do they hope to achieve in Lebanon? Because they've struck and bombed the heart of the capital, Beirut, as well.
I think Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to escape to the front. The difficulties he is facing on the battle for the third week almost on Iran, the ceiling or the objective of both America and Israel seems like is not easy to be achieved. There's a strong defense from the Iranian capabilities. So the weak point is Lebanon, and Benjamin Netanyahu is not in his intention to escalate or to stop the war. He would like to escalate as much as he can. He felt for some time, I think, that the American administration are facing the results of this battle, and maybe there is some pushing from the cabinet of President Trump to stop the war by all means, because most of the allies of America are not willing to assist him anymore, the Gulf area and other allies around the world. So I think Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to expand the war and do as much as he can influence on the Lebanon. But unfortunately, I think he found himself there is a strong defender from the Hezbollah personnel in Lebanon. Possible that sometime he will find himself by his own, and I don't think that America will continue to do as much as to help him, because there is a very big kind of push from the cabinet of President Trump to stop the war by all means. So I think the battle in Lebanon is not going to be with the long term on the favorite of Israel.
Okay, Dr. Osman, let's get back to the consequences of these assassinations. Now, you talked about Larijani being basically the person who's running the show, but also one of the interesting things about Larijani is his family. He's not the only person there who's in power. His brothers have also had their hands in power. Do you think now, with the elimination of Larijani, that Iran may possibly descend into chaos, and as you've said, generals there may somehow divide on how they're going to run the show?
I think that the loss of Larijani is something that the regime might suffer from on the medium to long term, not in the immediate term, and certainly not in the midst of this war, in terms of the regime's cohesiveness and its ability to maintain its own unity. I don't think that at this point we could see any fragmentation or internal infighting in the regime, at least not in this phase. Maybe if this war drags on for a few more months, we might see symptoms of that. However, we cannot say that this will happen in an immediate sense, but as I told you, Riham, Larijani was the balancing act. Of course, everyone observed, and everyone observed the authority and respected the authority of Ayatollah Khamenei, and everyone as well trusted Larijani as this common area between the different elements of the regime. His absence, of course, will definitely offset the entire situation and may cause a power competition within the ranks of the regime that will definitely and certainly be in the favor of the security elements, the security and militarized elements, basically the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the intelligence agencies of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and its subsidiary paramilitary groups like the Basij, for example. So they will be basically the ones who are calling the shots, I believe, from behind Mushtaba, who might, for all we know, be entirely incapacitated and unable to govern this country. And even if he isn't, the man has no credentials whatsoever, but being the son of Ayatollah Khamenei and also a favorite and a confidant of the hardline elements of the IRGC. So therefore, I believe that the loss of Larijani will be to the detriment of the regime's stability on the medium to long term. He does come from an influential family. His brother, Ayatollah Sadiq Larijani, is one of the senior clerics. He's a conservative. And he was actually one of the nominees who were being considered to become supreme leader. So that's a very interesting angle. His other brother, of course, I forgot his name now, unfortunately, but he is one of the philosophers and the ideologues behind the regime's vision for the region, for example, and the regional project. So he comes from a very influential family, and he's one of the foundational figures of the Islamic Republic, Rehab. He fought in the Iran-Iraq war. He was one of the young youth who participated in the revolutions and supported the Khomeini back in 1978 and 79. So he is an instrumental figure, certainly, and his loss is definitely a very, very painful loss for the Iranian regime at this critical time. And without his paradigmatic approach to governance and policy making within Iranian regime circles, I find it hard that he will be replaced in his own even constitutional position as the General Secretary of the Security Council, which because he will be replaced by someone else. It is rumored that it might be someone like Saeed Jalili, for example, a hardliner who's basically supported by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, or maybe even someone else who's even more radical. And this will definitely make Iranian decision makers pursue a course of action that could be even read as suicidal, Riham, which would be detrimental to the stability of Iran and the region, of course.
Back to Lebanon there. Now, reports are indicating that civilian casualties are rising as well as displacement. Now, I know you said that on the long run that the Israelis will basically have severe consequences from their actions in Lebanon, but it doesn't seem to be the case right now. At the moment, the Lebanese people are the ones who are suffering. How do you see this shaping public sentiment in Lebanon, and what can the Lebanese government do in the face of this aggression?
With the expansion of this conflict in both sides, Iran and Lebanon, Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to gather 450,000 of soldiers, which is seems to be a huge number, never happened before in different battles between Lebanon and Israel. But under this situation, I think it's not going to be an easy target. The Israeli people living on the border between Israel and Lebanon, most of them are almost moving, going to the cities of Israel, including Tel Aviv itself as a capital. So they are escaping from a fire to another different fire. I think with the long term, they will never find a good assistance from even America, because America, by all means, would like to withdraw from this battle. With the long term, I think Benjamin Netanyahu will find himself, if he is always proud that he is expanding and he can do a battle in different areas, it will be so difficult for him to continue as much as he can.
But sir, I mean, if I could just follow up there, in the past we've seen that the Israelis have managed to achieve many of their goals, like the assassinations of top commanders in Hezbollah and so forth. Do you think this is not going to be the case this time around?
Well, it happened before, and it have some kind of influence and effect. I think it's not going to be anymore. The capabilities of Hezbollah, it's going to be a kind of unexpected from the Israeli, as it happened almost with the Iranian. The capabilities of Hezbollah was not seen for the last couple of months, but I think they're going to make it very difficult for Benjamin Netanyahu within the coming few days and weeks.
Okay, Mr. Osman, let's talk about the Hormuz Strait. Now, this is the hot topic for everyone around the world. Now, Donald Trump has called for a coalition to basically secure the strait, but European allies have basically dragged their feet when it comes to cooperating in this. Why do you think that there's a transatlantic divide there, and why do you think that Europeans, as well as other partners from around the world, are not interested in joining these efforts?
Even though, Reham,
Dr. Osman, are you still with us? Okay, there seems to be a bit of a technical problem there. Let's get Mr. Maharam's take here and then get back to Mr. Osman once we can reach him again. Mr. Maharam, now France proposed sponsoring the direct negotiations between the Lebanese government and the Israelis. Do you think this is something that is viable and that the French can achieve some sort of internal, basically help fix the rift between the internal Lebanese divisions, as well as find a way to de-escalate the tensions in Lebanon?
Well, yeah, I think considering the effort of European Union and mainly France, Lebanon is very important to France and the European Union. With that kind of escalation from Lebanon, with the expanding the war in the region, the Middle East region, I hope something can happen immediately, but it seems like all the countries have done a tremendous effort for the previous years with the personnel character of Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet. I don't think anything can be tangible on the ground to change the matter. Also, from the point of the president of Lebanon, he and his cabinet really are under very strong kind of tension. Hope the efforts of France and the European Union can do something in the near future to stop the war immediately.
Okay, Mr. Osman, I think you're still with us, or back with us again. You were telling us a bit about the effects of the Hormuz Strait and why no one is really supporting Donald Trump there. If you could tell us again what you were saying.
Yeah, apologies on account of the technical glitch. Of course, the Europeans, even though most of the European powers were very supportive of Trump's war on Iran, yet they are very reluctant to get seriously involved in the fighting to any larger degree. France and the United Kingdom and other European countries got involved in the fighting in a defensive manner, meaning that they have placed certain military assets in the region to help intercept Iranian drones and missiles that are directed against Cyprus at some point, against Israel, against other countries in the region. So this basically was the task of the European military forces, in addition to the Red Sea Task Force that the Europeans have sent a couple of years ago to secure navigation in the Red Sea during the Houthis' disruption of navigation over there during the Gaza war.
But what's also interesting there is that NATO is also dragging its feet. Don't you think that this is a bit strange, since the US is a NATO member? Why are they not interested in joining the US efforts there?
They are not inclined because they are not obligated to do this, because the United States was not subjected to an act of aggression, so it did not invoke Article 5. And NATO is, at least officially, a defensive alliance. And in their mind, they do not believe that they have much to add, since the United States military might, the US's power outmatches the other 28 plus members of NATO combined, or 30 members.
Do you think this is possibly a reaction to the US's backtracking as well when it comes to other NATO issues like Ukraine and Russia?
I think that's an angle worthy of exploration, and I do lean towards that this is a factor that might dictate their policy. However, Trump is playing a very different game, Rehan. He's telling them, the Europeans especially, that the closure of Hormuz is an economic disaster for the Europeans, for Southeast Asia and East Asia, for U.S. allies in Asia like Japan and South Korea, and even for China, and a U.S. adversary, and not really that much of a crisis for the United States. The only shortcomings or the only consequences for the United States of the closure of Hormuz is a spike in fuel prices in the United States. However, they will not have an energy crisis, meaning that they will, because the U.S. is a net exporter of oil and gas. If anything, on the long term, this might be beneficial for the U.S. energy industry. However, with this taken into account, he's trying to push the Europeans to participate, telling them that if you do not come and open the Straits of Hormuz, they might be closed for a considerable amount of time. And I do disagree with Mr. Muharram's assessment that President Trump is looking desperately for a way out of this war. It doesn't seem like he is. It seems like this war is going to go on for quite a while, that it might go on for a few more weeks or even months. Some even might argue, even though I see that very hard to occur, and it will have disastrous consequences on the world economy. However, it cannot be ruled out. So at the end of the day, of course, the Europeans are suffering way more from the economic consequences of the closure of Hormuz than the United States is. And Trump is biding for time. He knows that at some point they might change their mind and they might actually take some action. And you know what, Riham? I do believe that they might. France is not deploying 12 warships and an aircraft carrier just to carry out a quote-unquote defensive operation. No, you do not mobilize this kind of military hardware with all of the cost this entails if you do not have contingency plans to carry out certain offensive actions. And this is what Trump, and by the way, the Americans really do not need the European military assets, but they do want to legitimize this war of aggression that they are waging on Iran. Riham. So that's the point. And also Trump wants to deassociate the United States from being the causal factor of the energy crisis in Hormuz. So he's trying to distribute the burden of the responsibility with other allies.
Okay, Mr. Muharram, let's get back to the idea of Lebanon now. You heard Mr. Osman there talking about the idea of the target here is for a prolonged war, basically. And now, given that the strikes are still continuing and diplomatic efforts are fading, do you see that there may be any sort of leverage that Lebanon can use towards finding a means for a ceasefire? Or do you possibly agree with the assessment by Mr. Osman there that no matter what happens, the Israelis will continue on for months ahead?
Well, on the ground, if Benjamin Netanyahu is hoping to do as much as he did before with the Lebanon borders, I think this time is going to be very difficult for a couple of reasons. He's too much involved with the Iranian case, and it will not end any soon. It seems it's going to be escalating, and it will take more few weeks and months as well. He cannot divide it himself in both sides. Lebanon is going to be so difficult for him, not as before. The defense of the Hezbollah is kind of, unexpected from the Israeli. To gather 450,000 soldiers in that time, there is huge pressure economically in the future of the battle, plus the whole world, starting from European Union and France, will not leave Lebanon alone by itself. So I think it is going to be very critical on the side of Israel administration. So something has to be done very soon, and he will never find any assist from America in that time, because America will never continue in that war with Iran. So I think very soon Netanyahu, he will find himself by himself alone to fight with Iran and Israel as well, Lebanon.
But there are fears that there may be a spillover when it comes to this conflict regionally. Do you think that this is something that is possible? And if so, how exposed do you think Lebanon would be in a wider confrontation?
Lebanon will find themselves politically and militarily under different pressure. But I think with the help of the European Union and France, something better can be done. The weakness point of Netanyahu and his troops, that he cannot divide himself under this pressure in both sides. Iranian will take him huge time and huge effort, and he will not succeed to achieve his target. Benjamin Netanyahu will find himself alone in both sides. He may lose the battle of Lebanon as much as he almost lost the battle in Iran.
Okay, that was Mohammed Osman, an international relations specialist, and Ahmed Muharrem, a writer and political researcher. Thank you both for joining me, and thank you for your insights here. That brings us to the end of this special coverage for this hour, and now we turn to our top stories with Basant Shahada.
Thank you, Reham. You're still watching Qnews, bringing you the latest regional and international developments, and here are the top stories making headlines this hour. Iran says it targeted Tel Aviv with cluster warheads in retaliation for the killing of its security chief, Ali Larijani. Iranian state television said missiles carrying cluster warheads were fired at Tel Aviv overnight in what Tehran described as retaliation for the killing of Ali Larijani. Israel has accused Iran of repeatedly using cluster munitions, which release multiple smaller explosives over a wider area and harder to intercept. Israeli authorities said the latest strike on the densely populated Tel Aviv area killed 2 people, bringing Israel's death toll from the war to at least 14. Iran confirmed Larijani's death on Tuesday after Reuters had reported he was killed in an Israeli strike, making him the most senior Iranian figure killed since Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. U.S. President Donald Trump has stated that Washington is expected to halt military operations against Iran in the very near future. He noted that Tehran would require up to a decade to rebuild if hostilities cease now. Trump added that most NATO allies have declined to participate in Washington's military operations against Iran, describing the stance as a very foolish mistake. Speaking from the Oval Office, he also urged international partners to help secure the Strait of Hormuz after Iranian actions disrupted tanker traffic.
Very powerfully, we've wiped out their navy, wiped out their military in every aspect. Their air force is now decimated. They have no air force.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is continuing strikes in Iran, telling Iranians his forces are watching from above. In a message addressed to the Iranian people, Benjamin Netanyahu said Israeli forces were striking what he called terror operatives across Iran and urged Iranians to mark the festival of fire as Israel was watching from above. The remarks came as the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran entered its third week, with the Strait of Hormuz still heavily disrupted, raising concerns over energy supplies and inflation. Nowruz, the Persian New Year, is celebrated by more than 300 million people worldwide and marks the start of spring in the Iranian calendar. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has stated that a growing number of voices, including officials in Europe and the United States, are now acknowledging that the war on Iran is unjust, urging more members of the international community to adopt similar positions. In a post on X, he warned that the repercussions of the conflict are only beginning to unfold, stressing that their impact will be universal, affecting all nations regardless of wealth, faith or race, and emphasized that Iran views its adversary as single unified foe. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has condemned Israel's attack on Lebanese military personnel, which killed 2 soldiers and wounded several others. He stated that such strikes blatantly contradict Lebanon's and the international community's calls to empower the army to assert state authority across all Lebanese territory and to confine weapons to legitimate armed forces. Aoun described the attacks as serious violations of international and humanitarian law, occurring alongside assaults that have claimed the lives of hundreds of civilians. He reaffirmed Lebanon's commitment to state authority, called for the immediate cessation of Israeli attacks, and demanded the army be left unharmed. Egypt has strongly condemned Israel's ground incursion into southern Lebanon, calling it a blatant violation of Lebanese sovereignty and a serious breach of international law and the United Nations Charter. In an official statement, the Egyptian Foreign Ministry affirmed full solidarity with Lebanon, rejecting any infringement on its territory and reiterating support for its unity and territorial integrity. Egypt demanded Israel's immediate withdrawal, full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, and a halt to all military operations, including airstrikes and attacks on UN peacekeepers. Egypt urged the international community to intervene decisively to prevent further humanitarian suffering and escalation of the regional crisis. That brings us to the end of our top stories for now. Stay with us for continued updates, expert analysis, and the latest developments here on Qnews.